here today. We've got a few new faces, which is good. How many of you are new? This is a participation thing too, so how many of you are new? You haven't been through any of those sessions, okay? Great. That means the rest of you have been through at least a session, if not multiple, and you're all caught up, ready to go, right? We start every day by just recapping some of the foundation that we've laid for the last, 3 days now. And so today will be no different. Again, this is as much for me as it is for you, but these are things that I tell myself all the time. I think it's good for us to remind ourselves regularly, and we'll get some people up to speed. Again, this is a participation thing, so if I'm going through something too fast or you have questions or a comment, if there's an aha moments are something we've talked about. If there's an aha moment, we want to know about it. This is a community, we do this together, so I got a bunch of material. It might be as much about facilitating conversation together as anything, right? So I'm going to pray for us, and then we're going to dive into just a little bit of a recap of the last 3 days, and then get into today, which I'm excited about. We'll see how far we get. God, this is your time. Again, this is your space. Man, it just blows me away what you're doing at conference this year, here in Okoboji, Iowa, and with the people who you've gathered here as well. And so I pray that we would have discerning ears and hearts, that we would be open to what you have for us, and that you'd be pleased by the topics that we discuss and the conversations that we have as we learn a little bit more about 5 generations all doing life together, and how we can just simply lead the community around us and our families and the places that we work and our churches in a way that just shows them your love a little bit more. So I pray that we would see how you love us a little more, even in this next hour in this room right here. And you are such a good God, and we need all of that. Pray these things in Jesus' name, amen? All right, so here we go, day number 1. I made this statement, and some of you had some wide open eyes, and some of you shook your head, and some of you shook your head the other direction. And that's always a good thing. No matter what your age, your position in life or work, personality, spiritual gifts, or whatever else you choose to put on that list, I believe that not only are we all leaders, but that leadership is in each of our calling. I think day 1 it was about that quiet too, right? And then I asked the question, how many of you see yourselves as leaders? And it was maybe a third of the room, half the room-ish. I said that my hope is by the time we get done with our sessions this week, that you not only do you see yourself as a leader, you really believe that, and you understand what maybe your role is, because we all have different roles as leaders. And we've talked about a little bit more about that throughout the week. Again, welcome to those of us joining us on the video. It's been a great discussion. If you've got questions, comments, aha moments, all that, put them in the comments below, and we're going to try to get back to you on some of that. And then if you have any questions, either on video or in the room here after these sessions, get a hold of me. My email, travis@fifthgenconsulting.org. I'm happy to get you graphics that we cover. I'm happy to get you resources that we've talked about, or bring clarity, and been able to do some of that yet this week already, and happy to do that after this conference as well. Okay, as you process this, if you have any questions or you want any of this material, certainly reach out to me, okay? All right, so the question was, how many of you see yourselves as leaders? And again, it was like maybe a third of the room, half the room. So now we're entering session number 4. Same question. How many of you see yourselves as leaders? Show of hands. Come on, this is good. This is good. Here's why I make this statement, that I believe that not only are we all leaders, but the leadership is in each of our calling, and this is in part, this is the summary of just my journey in being able to say that statement, and it's this. In Genesis 1:1, we see that God created you, that he created me in his very image, and then he declared over us that we are very good. That is so encouraging to me. We are very good. And then he declared that we have hope and we have a calling. Some of that is in our vision for conference this year. And that as we live our lives worthy of the calling he's given to us, that we are his masterpiece. That has come up since day one of conference, since even before day one of conference. And almost every day, if not every day, I've heard someone reference Ephesians 2:10, that we are God's masterpiece. Now we get to be difference makers in a world by leading them in love. In love. And I realize that can be super challenging. We move so fast as a culture and as a world. So when I throw out statements like this, and as we look at some different ways that we can go about bridging generational gaps, I realize that's not an easy thing. So if you're like, sounds good in theory, but I get that. Some of this is challenging. It's probably why it hasn't necessarily been the MO of our culture until now. Put up this generation chart, which has probably been the most requested graphic from you guys, and it's in your handouts as well. If you don't have a handout, just ask. We can get that to you. This generation chart, it just breaks down what 5 generations look like, and the classifications when you were born is what determines what generation you're in, and some of the things that go along with each of those generations. So some of the aspirations and attitudes and even some signature products. And then what's almost most important in this to me is communication media. What is the preferred communication media and style? Because how we interact with each other has a lot to do with how we communicate with each other. That's so important. So important. So we talked an awful lot about this, but what's clear in this is that we are in unprecedented times, that there are 5 generations of people rubbing shoulders with each other regularly. That's as families, that's in our churches, that's in our communities, that's in the organizations that we work with and work for. 5 generations of people, and that makes it challenging. So then we painted the picture of the scene that we are leading in. We're leading in a culture of speed and convenience, a highly entertainment-focused culture, one that nurture is a high value, and a culture of entitlement. And there's a negative assumption with each of those, which you can see on the screen or in your handout as well. That's kind of like the little gut check. Wow. When we walk out these doors, this is the scene that we're walking out to. When we talk with our families or lead our churches, this is the scene that we're leading into. So we talked about how to bridge generational gaps. How do we do this? How do we bridge these generational gaps effectively? Know and Grow was a tool that we talked about. Know and grow, and it starts with knowing yourself and growing yourself. That's important as a leader. You got to start with you. And then you can effectively lead other people. So know and grow, and the first part of knowing and growing is just know your story. Know your story. We took 4 minutes in this after I shared my story in 10 little markers in 4 different areas or timelines in my life. Then I gave you guys 4 minutes. 4 minutes to just write down some of the markers that have shaped your story. Because God's brought you on a unique journey for a reason. It's not on accident. And so you should use that story. But in order to use it, you got to know it. And then you got to be able to communicate it really well. You really need to be able to communicate it really well. And that takes practice. It takes intentionality. And you got to process before you start just telling your story. Otherwise, it's just going to be mumbled. You're not going to get through it really well. So know your story. I gave 4 minutes and then gave you some homework to keep going. Keep going with that. And some of you have done that, and some of you still have that homework. That's okay. Then we talked about the next section of how to know yourself, and a tool that I use as I'm coaching pastors and leaders, and as I've led staff at churches for the years, is I've developed a 5-section profile. And these are assessments that are out there readily available to you. Some of them are free even, which is my favorite 4-letter F word. Right? Free. You can use that. That's not unique to me. Spiritual gifts is the first one. If you're only going to do one of these assessments, do your spiritual gifts assessment. You should know the gifts that God has given you. That's so important. And the Enneagram, which is about your personality type. Okay, your personality type. Myers-Briggs, this is how we perceive the world and how we make decisions. When I did my Myers-Briggs for the first time, I was like, oh, that's why I make decisions that way. That makes a lot of sense. Okay, then temperaments, which is my second favorite out of all of these. If I wasn't a believer, it'd probably be my first, right? Temperaments is how we interact and how we communicate with each other. So important, so important. And then strengths finders, that's our talent DNA. Those are the strengths that you have and how you use them, okay? Your talent DNA. 5-section profile, we unpack that in a little more detail, and in your packet you've got just a little more information about each of those assessments. Man, we could spend a week just talking about Myers-Briggs or talking about temperaments. I could spend more than a week talking about temperaments, right? There's also another community that's happening right now over in Founders Hall that's focusing on gifts as well. And so if you're watching this and you're like, I want to do the spiritual gifts, I hear you say that it's important, but I want a little more information about that, watch it on the video. It'll be on YouTube after the conference is over as well. So watch that session. I plan to. So I encourage you to do that as well. All right, let me jump in the following day. We talked about 4-dimensional, 5-generational leadership, 4D, 5G leadership. And what does it look like in a 4-dimensional type of a model, especially in an organization or your family, to lead in, to lead up, to lead out, and then to lead down. The people who you lead down to are often the ones we think, oh, that's how we lead. We know the importance of leading in. We talked about that extensively. But often we forget about the fact that we really do lead out to those who are maybe on the same plane of an org chart, or maybe they are peers of yours in the same organization that you're in, right? The same industry. Could be that. Could be people in your family who are really on the same plane as you. And then leading up to those who supervise you or who influence you. That's a huge topic. That was a game changer for me when I thought about leading up to someone who I saw as my leader. Whether they were a supervisor or a grandparent or whatever it might be. So we talked about 4D leadership, and then we brought in 5-generational leadership, and we talked a little bit about how to do this in a generational model of how to bridge generational gaps by leading up to generations that maybe came before yours, right? And effectively leading down to generations that are below yours. Bridging generational gaps with that. And then also leading your generation as well in helping them understand what you're learning about bridging generational gaps and then learning from them. So I've learned more from my peers than I have from any class that I've taken or lecture or book that I've read. Soak up what you can from those who are in a similar generation as you. Whew. We packed all that into 3 sessions. That's not bad. And in the midst of that, a ton of really good discussion. And let's just keep that going here this morning. What kind of aha moments have you had as you've processed this a little bit more or heard even just that quick overview recap of where we've gone in the last few days? What comes to mind? Day 1, you're all eager to respond. Day 2, you had a few questions. Day 3 is like, I should say something. Day 4, you're like, I'm just tired and I have no clue what you actually just said. What do you think? Any ahas? Any comments or thoughts?
I think we gave them to you yesterday.
Yeah, you did. We've had a lot of good discussion on it. I kind of teased yesterday that today is the day that I've been looking forward to the most, because we're going to talk about the role of the local church in a 5-generational world. With the scene and the tools that we just talked about, what's the role of the local church? This gets me excited. I get to work with churches, so this gets me excited.
To me, that one of the important things about the leadership you're talking about is the importance of being an example.
Mm-hmm.
And I think especially for those of us that are a certain age, it seems that our Christian example is probably key to those other generations looking at us.
Mm.
And that we communicate a lot of things just by what we do.
How about that? Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, I agree. We're all examples. And we are examples in our own generation. We're examples to generations that are above us or below us in when they were born, what shaped you. We should be learning a whole lot from each other. For sure. For sure. Well, I had a professor in seminary who said to me after I gave this talk to our whole class. I was nervous about giving this study. It was like a mini sermon, right? And so it was part of our classwork, and I was assigned this day, and it was, I'm sitting in front of our class of peers who I really do respect, and a professor who I had a pretty good relationship with, and I did my work. I prepared what I thought was at least one of the better messages I'd prepared to that point, if not the best. I mean, I put some significant time and energy and effort into this thing, and I delivered it. And I felt okay, pretty good, above par about delivering it. I was definitely relieved that it was over, right? And the way the classroom was set up, it was kind of a U-shaped classroom, and there's 2 different levels. So I had some of my peers who I'm like looking up, like this as they're sitting around, and some of them who I'm like on the same plane, and the professor's like sitting right next to me, because it's pretty tight, it's like this size of a room, but all around. He's sitting like right next to me, and he's jotting notes as we go, and I'm thinking, this could be good, this could be not so good, but I'm relieved. It's done, right? And I remember feeling the sense of like, okay, now I can move on. And I turned to McCloskey. Mark McCloskey was the professor. Some of you may even know him at Bethel Seminary. And he said, Travis, thanks for that. So I'm like, woohoo, all right. And then he goes, but so what? I mean, I thought I failed the class right there. I'm going, what? Huh? He goes, but so what? Like, you gave us all of this great information and this study of Scripture, which was great, and it's what we asked for. But so what? What does this mean for me? What's the application? And I realized at that point, well, I left that out. It was a class that wasn't about application necessarily. I was doing an exegesis of this Scripture thing. It was out of my realm. I was definitely expanding myself and stretching myself, but they just listened to a whole bunch of information for 20 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever it was. Felt like 2 hours. I just said, but so what? And so my homework was to go back and say, I just learned this stuff and I gave this stuff, but so what? And up to this point, we've had some of just getting material, getting some tools, and some of the so what. But today, I'm hopeful that we can get to some of the application, the so what about this whole overview of what we've covered over the last 3 days. I don't want you to walk away and go, so what? What does this mean for me? Or just be so confused about where to even go from here that you do nothing. That wastes all this time that we spent together. That's not my goal or my heart at all. So, what is the role of the local church in a 5-generational world, knowing the scene that we're leading in? And I think that it's important for us to go back to some of the questions that you asked, because this is really what spurred me to get to this on day 4 here and to lead into it the way that we did. And so I kind of summarized 3 different questions that you guys wanted to cover when we opened the floor up on day 1. I summarized it into this statement, or this question, what's the role of the local church in a 5-generational world? But one of the questions was, how do we lead effective ministries when excellence is available online and on demand anytime and anywhere, right? Did you pose that question? Yeah. Is that, close enough. You want to expound on that anymore?
I've read some things about how the role of the local pastor might be growing towards becoming a curator.
Yeah.
Rather than primarily a teacher.
Yeah.
I'm in a small rural church as well, so a Gen X or a boomer pastor is never going to be, typically not going to be as appealing to younger people as the kinds of pastors you find on the Preachers and Speakers Instagram account. So
been on there, by the way. Got to be on there because I hired a young guy who had been given a pair of these super high-end sneakers when he left his previous role as like a parting gift. So when I had him come up and we introduced him to the whole church, I had him wear them, and we said, hey, hashtag Preacher with Sneakers. We ended up on there. So there you go.
It's Preachers and Pickups.
Yeah, Preachers and Pickups. I like that.
My pastor actually does a little video update for those pickups.
I love that.
So I think just an opportunity that we've been presented with, forced on us to say, what do we need to do well? Whereas without some of the coronavirus limitations, we may have just continued in some models that were losing effectiveness.
Yeah, one of the benefits of having to change what we do because it's a mandate for this season is that it's given us the permission and even slowed the roll on some of the other things that are vying for our time and attention, allowed us to pivot some of the ministries that maybe have stalled or maybe have needed to pivot before, of doing some crisis coaching with some pastors and some churches. And it's exactly that. How can we pivot what you've been doing to match what you need to be doing? This has given us a little bit of a breather to be able to do some of it. A little bit of a respite from some of the grind that ministry can be, for sure. Thanks for posing that question. Another question was, how do we build effective strategies, especially around growing young, to reach demographics that aren't coming to our churches right now? Now, that was a couple of different questions summarized into one question, right? That came from a couple different people, right? A little bit back there. Yeah, you want to expound on any of that? Is that summarizing?
That, we're a small rural community with a lot of aged people in our church.
Yeah.
We have a local college and stuff like that, so there's opportunity.
Churches effective in reaching young people for Christ. Okay, we talked about these generations. I mean, we'll look a little bit more about who's actually going to church. Part of today. What do our churches make up now? What are the roles of maybe a generation, a baby boomer in the current church? How can we effectively reach someone who maybe is Gen X or a millennial or a Gen Z? I love that. Anything in the questions that we threw out there on day one, in the combined questions that I wrote up here, that you're just like, ooh, this is something that we really would be so valuable if we can get to? Okay, let's keep rolling. That's great. In all of this, I think a good place to start is just to level set, again, our understanding of what the local church is and who the local church is, because that's really important. We're talking about all kinds of strategies and make sure that we're all on the same page here on what and who the local church is. So the word church comes from the Greek word ecclesia. Yeah. Okay, so the Greek word ecclesia, it comes from two different words. The word is ek, which means out, and kaleo, which means called. Okay? Called out. And because of the form of the word, we know that it actually implies someone, right? This is called out, not something, but someone or a group. Okay, that's the form that we read the word in. You guys tracking with me so far? So we know that it's called out one or called out ones. Because of where we read this in Scripture, we know that the called out ones are followers of Christ. Everyone following with me? Yeah. So the church is called out people that are followers of Christ. That's what it is. In today's culture, because we just have to simplify everything, we just do. We just say the church is the people, right? You've heard that before. The church is the people, and I think that's just common language, especially in the church environment, right? These people are followers of Christ that gather as an organization as they live out their calling. But here's a few things that I just wrote down as I was thinking through how to go about level setting to make sure we're on the same page here. Is the called out people that we read as the ecclesia, that's the early church. That's where we read it. We read it in the New Testament for the first time. The ecclesia is the called out people who follow Christ from the early church. That's the early church, but it's also the traditional church. It's the modern church, it's the rural church, it's an inner city church, it's the small church, it's the mega church. It is the church, capital T, right? This is the church, the capital T church. And obviously, because of our English language being a language where there's one word that means multiple different things, right? We use the word church to also talk about the organization, right? That's interchangeable. We sometimes even refer to the buildings that we go to as the church. Right? And so sometimes, I do this, you do this, people outside of the church do this. They call the church three really different things: the organization or the building or the people that make up the church. And so sometimes we're going to need to bring clarity to what we're actually talking about when it's the church. But the church, capital T, the, is a group of people who are called out because they're followers of Christ. That's the level set. And that's the same today as it is from the early church. Our styles of communication and programming and effectiveness and all of that doesn't change the fact that we are called out followers of Christ. Okay? Now, we've looked a couple days ago and even yesterday the fact that we're all created pretty unique. We all have unique journeys, unique stories, unique gifts. Your 5-section profile, I guarantee you, will not be the same as mine. And I'm so glad about that. Otherwise, this would be really boring to do together, right? That we're all created uniquely, given all these different gifts and strengths and talents and journeys and stories and all of that, which means that the organization, the smaller T church, that are led by the big T church, all these people, that since they're all different, unique people, that the organizations should all be different and unique too. There's not a cookie cutter, this is what an organization church should look like, or should sound like, or should feel like, because they're led by different people who God's called into those positions, appointed and anointed, and given vision and direction. That is so important, you guys. I can't tell you how many times where I go into a church, there's churches that I've been on staff at as I've come in, churches that I have mentored pastors in or helping do strategic planning with. I'm like, let's just talk about 3 years down the road. What do you want to do as a church? What's your vision? What do you want to be in 3 years? So that we can start building a little bit of a picture of what that is and strategically plan how to get there. Right? And so many times I hear, well, we want to be like, and then they name their favorite church, or whatever church is a hot name right now. We want to be Hillsong, or we want to be North Point, or Life, or whatever it is. And it almost boggles me why that's even part of a conversation. And some of it I know is because of their effectiveness, right? And so I usually try to re-steer that conversation and say, what is it about those churches that you want to be like? Because if you want to preach like Andy Stanley, I'm out. I got other things to do than try to help you strategically plan of how to get to be a great communicator like an Andy Stanley or a Craig Gershell or whoever it is. If you want to have music that sounds and looks just like this, you're talking to the wrong person. You should go talk to them and see how you can be a mirrored image of what that organization is, right? Instead, we try to shift the focus and say, what is it about that organization like, or that you want to model? Maybe it's a ministry model. Well, now we can start talking. A lot of times it's about effectiveness. They're like, oh, I've heard great things about this church, or they're attracting the generation that we want to go after. Well, that's effectiveness. We're talking about effectiveness now, and we can build strategies about how to be effective in similar ways that some of these churches are. But in your community, with your church leaders, under the organization that you call church, with the capital T church that you have right now and that you want to reach, which is, by the way, different than the organizations that maybe they mentioned before, because they're on the other side of the world or the other side of the country or even down the road from them. Right? You're reaching different people because you're unique, and God's put a unique gift and calling and passion and gift set and made you unique. I'm just going to pause for a second right there. Give me your thoughts. Give me your I don't agree with you. Give me something.
I'll break the ice.
Yeah, break the ice.
I love that thought because, I mean, as we culminated this whole deal about how unique each one of us are, right? And one of the things I hate in church today is that whole thought process that we want to be like that church, we want to be like that church, we want to do what somebody else is doing, and yet we are called as a body to be unique and to reach each uniquely and right where we're at. So that's the first time I've ever heard that, but I do love that.
Anybody else, this is the first time you've heard this? And that's great if it is. Like I expect that. So.
I was pretty much here for the same thing. I was writing questions for my application.
Yeah.
But what are the gifts and talents that are currently in our church body? And we're 24 years old now, so a lot of gifted people were in that beginning and had a desire to get this going. Well, then we've added more and more folks. And of course, I'm moving here and there, so dynamics change again. But so how are we reaching? And how do we want to grow using the gifts that are already in our body?
Yeah.
So first would be helping them find out or asking them what their gifts are and how they are and intend to or want to.
Well, I think that's a big part is that, God puts something different on every one of our hearts that breaks our heart differently. What breaks my heart is going to be a little different than what breaks your heart, right? And what breaks the heart of your church leadership is what you should go after. If you just have a heart broken for the lost youth in your community, go for that, right? If you have a heart to reach the lost generation, well, go for that, or a specific demographic. Maybe it's a heart to just change the homeless population in your community. Go for that, but that may be different than the heart of the pastor who's 10 miles down the road from you. And that's good. That's okay, yeah.
But those each could be subsets within the larger church.
Absolutely.
The missional communities, this is our heart, and we're going to do that. This is our heart. So then we multiply at a much more complex level.
Yeah.
I think that although it's fine to reach out to the unreached missions, and that can be downtown Minneapolis, I think that today there is probably too much emphasis on trying to grow the church. How can we market the church? How can we have cool music programs to get the kids in? How can we have fun children's things? What we're losing though is the teaching of the church when we're doing that, and we're becoming dangerously close to many of the churches being the Church of Laodicea, where everybody just wants to be entertained and marketed to souls instead of coming to learn.
Spiritual growth has to happen in the church community. That's what we see in the early church. So you're right on there. We're going to get to some of this. Well, it's my very next slide. Way to go. Way to go. You're getting there. Okay, we're setting this foundation. What's the role of the local church in the 5-generational world? Last few minutes. The two things we just have to acknowledge is that we are the church, capital T, the called out ones who follow Christ. Okay, first one. Second one is that we should lead different organizations because we're different people. God's made that unique. It's been clear over the last few days. And I love that. I love that all of our churches can look just a little bit different. That's just fine.
I wonder if one of the questions that Sky asked on Sunday, the second question, it's what he was asking us significantly to each of us individually. I wonder if it doesn't apply maybe to what we're talking about here. His question is, do you really know who you are as a church? Is that kind of foundational before we figure out, okay, how do we reach out and where do we reach out?
I think it's an important thing for us to figure out for sure. If you're building strategies and you don't even know your identity, part of your identity probably has to be your vision, by the way. And that vision may change. The vision for your church may change if you have new leadership, or maybe a new season. Maybe God's transformed a leader and given them something different on their heart. Well, I'd say that's an important part of who your church is. And you need to know that vision, and it needs to be developed based on who you are as a church, especially of your leadership. Leadership's going to drive the direction. You've got to trust your pastor, and you've got to trust your church leaders to be able to do that. And if you are in one of those positions, you've got a lot of responsibility. Take it seriously. Do a great job with it. Yeah.
Are you familiar with the simple church philosophy?
Simple church?
Yeah. Well, our church has worked with a book, and we've gone in that direction the last couple of years, where we decided we're going to stop trying to do everything. And we're going to decide what things are that we should be doing.
Yeah.
And we're going to do them well.
Yeah.
And it's been working very well for the church, has really grown. But instead of having something going on every single night and just doing it
Yep.
we're going to take certain things and it's really worked very well.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that as well. I've got that on a slide in just a little bit, and the why behind a little bit of that. But our younger generations, Gen X, Y, and Z, they want fewer things, and they want them done in excellence, because that's what is around them. The stimuli that they are receiving all the time is done in excellence. It is crazy the amount of excellence that is coming at them all the time. So when something is done that's below that, well, they just flip to whatever's done better than that, because it's right there at their fingertips all the time. So less things done at a level that you can do your best with them will reach the younger generation better. Yeah.
I think our young people also want truth, honesty, and transparency.
How about that? We're going to get to that too.
Because
Yeah.
so many of our young people, after they're attending college, they're kind of falling away from the church.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's the college, university's fault, or if they're just not seeing truth and they want truth.
Yeah. I have an interesting graphic, which isn't a part of this, but it shows our Gen Y and Gen Z that were going to church that aren't going to church anymore, and when they stop going to church. And what was shocking to me about this study and this research is that most of them stopped going to church, or made the decision to stop going to church, before the age of 18. Which I thought, oh, it's for sure when they leave the house and they're on their own, they can make their own decisions. They're influenced by culture a little bit more. They go to college, and what this study shows is that it's actually earlier on, which means we need to do a whole lot better job. Why maybe their parents are making them go, or maybe why we have them still there to help them understand the value and what they're doing. Yeah.
So maybe what's happening in those last few years in the home is they're like your professor. They're listening to what's being said and done and saying, so what?
Wow.
So what?
That's a gut check.
The Barnett Institute has done a lot of research over recent years on the statistics about young adults leaving the church. Recently, David Kinnaman published the book called Faith for Exiles, which flips it and studies the percentage that doesn't leave the church. And there's 5 key things in investing in young people in our church that really greatly increase the chances of them staying. So that's a recommendation for me. It's one of the best books I've read in quite a while. Faith for Exiles. And
If you're taking notes.
In this context, intergenerational meaningful relationships at church is one of the significant things.
Yep. How about that? No surprise. Absolutely. Okay, here we go. This is the question. Evangelism or discipleship? By the way, this has been a question for a long time. Last 25 years, a lot of churches have really been wrestling with this. We had the seeker-sensitive model, and we had the guest-focused model, and we had the spiritual formation model, and really it all comes back to whether we should focus our efforts, energy, our resources, everything into evangelism or into discipleship. What should we be focused on? The Great Commission, Jesus says, go and make disciples. There they are. Go is the evangelism piece. Make disciples. Make is the disciples piece. Okay, it's been coined go and grow. That's a really common one you'll read in books or on blogs or whatever all the time. Go and grow. Go for evangelism. Grow for discipleship. Where should we be putting our effort and energy? Is this just worshiptainment, right? Or are we really focusing on spiritual growth here? And where should we be putting our efforts and energy? And what's going to be most effective now in a 5-generational world? What bridges generational gaps now? Is it evangelism or is it discipleship?
Just a subtle distinction, but I read somewhere at one point that a better rendering of that is as you go make disciples. And that changes the tone just a little bit.
Yeah. Well, what it does is it makes the evangelism and the discipleship synonymous, which is in my next slide, which is great. Here it is. Should we focus on evangelism or discipleship? Yeah, you should. That's what Jesus says. He says, go and grow. Synonymous with each other in that. And that is astute, Brian. Thanks. I love it. It wasn't a commission, by the way, for the early church that then they somehow completed and then is now obsolete for us, or something that we can learn from or whatever. This wasn't a commission that Jesus said, okay, for you 12 or you 3,000 or whatever it was, until the next 15 years has gone past and the early church is really developed, or 100 years or whatever. This is what we should be doing, and then it's going to change. That's not what we're talking about here, right? This is the Great Commission from Jesus, for the early church, for our church. It doesn't lose effectiveness in a 5-generational world. It never will. This is our commission as the capital T church. So yes, focus on evangelism and discipleship, and if either of those is lacking, then we probably need to bring a focus back to it. I agree with you. And they are synonymous with each other. We could spend a ton more time talking about that for sure. Let's do this. In order to have a strategic vision, we got to know some of our stats. Here are some of the stats you guys were asking for. Right here, this is Barna. A lot of what I have comes from Barna research, plus they make it open source so we can actually show it in something like this and post it to a website. But here is religious identity. This is from 2018. It's the earliest one that I have for now. Maturists, 81, they call them elders here. Here are elders, maturists. 81% will identify as Christian, and I put Christian as Catholic as well. These are Jesus-believing, Bible-believing people. So, right, wrong, or otherwise, that's how I put that. 81% would say that they are in that group, and 19% other. As we move, I guess this way on your screen, boomers, 75%, so it drops down fairly significantly. 25% would identify as other. For Gen Xers, 65% as believers, and 35% other. Starts getting a bit sobering for sure. But then there's no difference between millennials and Gen Xers, according to this study. That is 65%. That was surprising when I saw that for the first time a while back. Okay? And then Gen Z, 59% as Christian and 41% as other. This has continued to follow that same trajectory, by the way. I don't have a study and a graphic and that kind of thing from it, but I've heard quite a bit from studies that are happening right now that the rise of the nuns is prevalent. The nun, no religious affiliation, N-O-N-E, the nuns. Not N-U-N, right? But the rise of the nuns, the N-O-N-E, is just taking over. That they're tripling in their percentage every year. Yeah.
Looking at your graphic, Gen Z, the atheists, and all of the other 4 categories, it's somewhere between 5 and 7, and Gen Z it jumps to 13.
Yeah.
And I think that's partly because of what is being taught in the schools.
Yeah. Sure.
Because the public schools are becoming anti-Christian and
I know a lot of you were interested in this. So I said, hold on, I got a graphic for you. I'll get it to you. So here it is. Here's another one that, this one shocked me a little bit and I'm still processing it, to be honest with you. But this is how Americans express or experience their faith. This is Americans as a whole, generalized, right? And this is from 2016, so it's a little bit older. I don't know if this would be exactly the same or not, probably not, but Americans experience and express their faith. They identified and said that I express my faith, I experience faith through praying to God. This is 2016. It'd probably be lower than this right now, 75%. Wow, 75%. But 35% say that as I experience and express my faith through prayer, church attendance really isn't that important to me. That's what that shows me, right? 35% only do that. And then 34% read the Bible. My guess is that's the same group of people. There's like a couple who said, yeah, I go to church, but I don't really read my Bible as an expression or experience of my faith, right? Those would probably be the same people in the study who identified, in those areas. But then this one has really been important for me, and I know this number is higher than 19% now, but volunteer at a nonprofit. They volunteer at a nonprofit as an expression of their faith, that seems right, but as an experience of their faith. We do that as a family. Like I value that. We work with a couple of nonprofits. I'm on the executive board with a nonprofit. That's important to us. And my generation, everyone in our small group volunteers with a nonprofit. And I think they're all different. I think. Maybe two of them are the same. We all volunteer at nonprofits. That's important to us. And it feels like an expression of faith. But we're not talking about just churched people here. These are Americans. Express their spiritual, growing and their spiritual movement in their life through volunteering at a nonprofit, even more so than volunteering at church. Okay, or attending a small group or a Sunday school. And we put so much effort and energy into trying to build community and trying to build spiritual formation through Sunday schools and through Bible teaching, and that's good. We need discipleship in our church, and it is missing in a lot of churches. But man, the focus, if you'd have asked me 5 years ago, what's the one thing you guys got to get better at as a church, I would have said community. Community, we're in a community group right here. People who aren't going to church right now, they just long for community. And I don't necessarily know that's the thing. That's not the thing for our family. We love the community that we have at church, but that's not the driver of why we go to church.
Is this representative of all Americans or all Americans? So that says I need to praise God, that can be any religion too.
Yeah, sure. Mm-hmm. This was interesting to me, and I'm still unpacking it and chewing on it for sure. Here's the total U.S. population by generation, and this is important for us to know because it allows us to kind of understand some of the other metrics that we get and statistics that we get. So now we can see some of how our the U.S. is made up of by population or generational areas. Okay, Gen Z, it's our youngest generation, makes up 20%, 26%. This is by 2020, by the way. Not with the new census. I'm sure they don't have those numbers yet, but this is 26% of the world all around us in the U.S. is our youngest generation. 26%. Wow. Millennials, 25%. You're reading that right. That's half around us that are Gen Z or Gen Y. And then it continues to move around. Gen X and baby boomers are almost identical now. Baby boomers, this is the biggest generation. Not the biggest generation anymore. And they're actually fairly on par now with Gen X, 1 percentage point away. And then they break out, because they can, the silent generation, the greatest generation. We've just been calling them maturists. So anyone that's 1945 or before born, maturists, right? They're 8% total right now. 8% total.
Why the silent gen label on this graph?
I don't. Yeah, I don't. There's different labels for different generations depending on what, who's doing the research and all of that. But yeah, I wish I did. Yeah. If you look around your churches, I look around my church. If we look around our churches, does it represent this? When you look around your church, is a quarter of your church in Gen Z? Is there a gap maybe in the millennial generation? Do you have 25% of your church that are millennials? Some of the churches that I've been at, yeah, absolutely. Some, not so much. Some churches, for sure, I've been to, have nobody in the late baby boomers and in the maturest category. Nobody. Walk in there, don't see any gray hair. Right? And vice versa, the other way around. Sometimes I walk into a church and there are no kids. There's no millennials. And what I said earlier is so true. I believe that not every church should look the same. So it is okay to walk into a church and to see baby boomers and maturists gathered together. I think that's okay. And the other way around. As the capital T church.
You said that you've seen the churches where it is a younger crowd. Is there a trend, as you've worked with a number of churches, between churches that are more recent plants, skewing younger, towards longer established churches skewing older?
Well, I think the reason that there would be a slant to that is you typically don't see a late baby boomer or mid baby boomer who's planting a church. Sometimes, but if you look at church planters as a whole, they are a younger demographic of people, and they're gonna go after and try to build an organization that's filled with similar type people that share their heart. So if there is, and I don't know that there necessarily is, but if there is, that's probably why. Any thoughts on that? Yeah.
I think that there probably has always been, to a certain extent, the falling away of younger people. The seniors in high school, and they drop off as they're doing other stuff, and then maybe they don't show up again until they are married with kids in Sunday school. The problem I think that we're having now is we're now missing everybody went to Sunday school, everybody did prayer in church, everybody knew the Lord's Prayer, so that when you got to marry with little kids, you had something to return to. I think the problem now is too many never did have a base that they can return to.
I think what's important to distinguish is that may be a problem. I don't think that's the problem. I think that is a problem for sure. There's not a silver bullet, by the way, for all this, where we can go, okay, here is our solution. One of the reasons for that is, well, that might be the case in a rural church or in a metro church and not be the case in the other. Or in a traditional church or in a modern focused church or whatever it may be, but not in the other. It may be the case in one denomination, but not the case in another denomination that's put a high focus on those things. So I think that that is a problem for sure. I see it. Absolutely. I don't know that's the problem. Would you agree with that? Would you disagree? And I'm like, by the way, I hope you know this thus far about me. So I'm okay if we disagree on a lot of these things.
Well,
that is okay.
We were the generation where everybody went to Sunday school and we had prayer in church and did the Lord's Prayer.
Sure.
It was while we were in grade school that they took prayer out of the school.
Yeah.
And that's when you started to see, there were no school shootings back then. The things that there are now, you didn't see as much drugs. There's still kids that smoke and stuff like that. But you didn't see what you do now, and that we started seeing the shift,
Yep.
seeing the change, started seeing the disrespect of adults and things like that.
Yeah. thanks for sharing. It's great. Well, if we're going to picture a healthy church, which is what we all want, right? We all want healthy churches around. If we're going to picture a healthy church reaching healthy communities that are all around us that we're trying to serve, then we need to ask ourselves, why has the local church lost some of its relevance with the younger generations? And maybe that's a question that we could have asked 50 years ago, and maybe it was asked 50 years ago or 100 years ago. What we have is the time right now. And we know that our Gen X, Gen Y, and Gen Z generations have lost some of their value for church. It is not relevant for them anymore. And so I've asked this question so many times, and I don't have the answer to this all the way. I have an answer to this, but not the answer to this for sure. Why has the local church lost some of its relevance to the X, Y, and Z generations? And I think the biggest thing that we're up against is that those generations are skeptical of the church. And there's a ton of studies and articles and books written about this. They are skeptical of the church. Some of it, by the way, I think is fully merited. Some of it I resonate with, and I don't like it. Some of what I read, I go, yeah, I feel that, or I've felt that, and maybe it's because of a value of legacy, or because of spiritual maturity, or I don't know what, but I've continued to push through that, and get to the point that I am here today. But these generations are skeptical of the church. And by the way, they're skeptical of organizations as a whole. They are. The rhetoric with these generations goes like this: these organizations will eventually abuse their power and authority. I've seen it before. That's what I believe. That's what the people around me believe. And so maybe I'll go because I have a little bit of a value. Maybe I'll go 6 times a year or 1 time a month, and being somewhat spiritually connected in whatever area that is, that's a value for these generations. We see that. It's not that they want to be completely disconnected. They have a value. But they don't want to belong to an organization because they've been burned or they've seen the churches abuse that power and authority.
You kind of touched on this the other day too, the reluctance to be members.
Uh-huh.
It seems like you can get the benefits without being linked to the problems and the difficulties of baggage.
Yeah, it's about ownership. It's about membership. It's if I can go and be associated with something, or I drove a GMC, and that GMC was a good vehicle. I got a good deal on it, and I drove it, and that's fine. That GMC is not about my identity at all. So when they declare bankruptcy and they have to have a government bailout, whether I agree with that or not, it really doesn't have anything to do with me at all. But if I've got stock in GM, and I'm there at their annual meetings and helping inform decisions, and they go to their bankruptcy and have a government bailout and whatever, well, that's a different story. Now my friends are looking at me and going, do you still believe in GM? I didn't believe in GM before. It's just a vehicle that I got a good deal on, that I liked the way it looked and drove, and I got to be on Preachers with Trucks or whatever you call that. It's I love that, like that. Preachers with Pickups, is that what it is? I love it, yeah, right? That's a different scenario for sure. And so if people say, well, I went to this church and their pastor had a moral failure, but last time I was there was a few months ago. Well, there's no identity that's stuck there. But man, I'm a member at that church. I'm on the elder board, or I volunteer there. You volunteer there? What? You are a part of that church. That's where we give. That is a different scenario, for sure. And so they may come, get spiritually filled, but they really treat it as a spectator event. Maybe get a little bit involved, but at arm's length.
I would think that I have a reverse skepticism would have to be authenticity.
Unpack that.
I think what I see those younger that affects them most positive is when my story, my 4-minute story, intersects with them and they believe it's
is authentic,
Mhm.
being authentic.
Mm-hmm.
And so put that onto the church. If the church is authentic and has authentic hurts and they have authentic exposure to some of those things, all of a sudden skepticism is replaced with at least a curiosity, because authenticity wins over because it's usually encapsulated by love.
I think that's a great thing in theory, and I've used that. I have said, we need to be authentic. We need to tell authentic stories. We got to be transparent and authentic, because otherwise they're just going to see right through it, right? And I totally agree with that, as long as they're coming. But if you're not even reaching them, well, the problem isn't actually being authentic with them. The problem is you've never rubbed shoulders with them, because they're going to keep you at arm's length. The first problem we have to tackle is, how do we actually get them there? How do we get to them, maybe, right? And then as we can rub shoulders with them, then live authentically. Tell them authentically who Jesus is and why he has rocked your world in the best way possible, and how it's been hard, and how it's been beautiful and brings joy to your life, and how you're skeptical too. I think some of the best conversations I've had with people is when they come in and they're like, I just want to be a fly on the wall. I'm kind of skeptical of this whole place. I remember I was senior leadership at a church of 30,000 people. You got all kinds of people walking through the door skeptical. And I'd be like, you know what? Me too. Me too. So let's talk about it. If you want to talk about it, I'm here to talk. You want to just be a fly on the wall, please, by all means. But when you have those questions, if you are skeptical and they seem to be confirmed, I want to know about that, because if it is true, I want to change that. And they go, oh, okay, all right. Their skepticism starts to go down just a little bit, because they do see authenticity, but they got to get there first.
They are most unlikely to buy into his story until they see how his story is impacting our story. And then for all of us to have it, write it down, build it, create it, and then share that first.
I love that you see that value. I really do. Story is such an important way to bridge generational gap. I'm telling you, I've been listening. Even this morning when I got here, there were stories that were being shared between two gals in this room. I love that. I love that. We shared some story just 10 minutes before walking in here. Shared story over the last few days, and pretty soon you make connections. You're like, oh, this is, yeah. We had a question in the back.
I'm just curious if you said that there's some reason for these young generations to be skeptical.
Yeah.
It seems to me, if there are reasons for them not to be skeptical, it's harder for us to fix that. If there are reasons about us that are making them skeptical, those are the things we should focus on, because that's what we need to change in who we are. So I'm just curious. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what are the reasons the current church in the U.S. is giving the younger culture a reason to be skeptical.
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. I think this is part of the reason right here. They see us as judgmental. 87% of millennials that don't go to church see us as judgmental. That breaks my heart. As hypocritical, that's a gut check, because sometimes, yeah, in my life, probably in your life too. And 91% see Christians as anti-homosexual. Anti-homosexual. One of the things that we know about millennials, by the way, is that it's okay for most millennials. This is a blanket statement, right? So not true for everyone, but they are okay if we believe something different. We can still even live together in the same communities, sharing walls together, and not agree on the same thing. Right? But they don't want us to be anti who they are or what they believe. They want us to know what we believe and why, and be okay not agreeing on that, but not oppose them in it. Right, wrong, or otherwise. Yeah.
I think that the difference is they are being literally taught that in schools, and especially in university. They're literally being taught those things in schools, and especially in universities, because there are been to Sunday school, they were in the choir and everything else. They go off to college and they have professors that are supposed to be brilliant people, and they come back, and instead of continuing to believe what everyone that they love, respect, all their friends, neighbors, relatives, and everything, now suddenly some professor in college that they respected has told them all those things up there, and so that's now what they...
A thing? I think it's a thing, but I don't know that it's the thing. I know I've said that a few times today, but I really believe that could be a thing, but not the thing, yeah.
Yes, maybe the schools are teaching those things, but I think we, the church, are teaching them more profoundly than they are. We are being judgmental.
Thanks, Jerry.
We are being hypocritical. That's the problem, you know?
Someone over here?
Oh, I was just going to make a comment. I've got 4 kids. One just graduated from college, 2 in college, a senior in high school. And I don't mean to disagree, but that hasn't been our experience in public college and in high school. And there are other influences out there, but I don't know that it's a direct concerted effort by the educational system.
There's cultural issues going on here too. I want to take just a different position. There's cultural issues going on too. A university won't let Condoleezza Rice speak in their college because she's going to be inappropriate in anything she says because she's from the wrong political party. I mean, we're living in a day and age when it's just not okay to believe differently than somebody else. So what do you do with that? I mean, I don't think this is just about us as Christians. I don't think that 87% of people who've chosen not to go to church see Christians as judgmental. I don't think that's an accurate reading on those of us in the church. I agree completely it's their perspective and how they feel, but I don't think it's accurate. And when you look at what's going on in the culture has changed so much and has become so definite about so many things, and free speech isn't free speech anymore. And so this is way more complicated than what's going on even in the church.
It's so complicated.
And so then how do you deal with that?
Yeah. By the way, the messiness of this I love, because if you look at the early church, if you look in 1 Corinthians, this is exactly what they're dealing with. It's all the same stuff. It's just lather, rinse, repeat with our current culture scene, and then now 5 generations of people who are bringing their messiness into the equation instead of 2 or 3. And you've got all this different history and desires and culture and technology that lets us get the information out instead of writing a letter that then takes 2 weeks, in order to get to them.
So how can we deal with it? I throw out the possibility of control myself. So I need to not be judgmental. I need to not be hypocritical. And I ask the question when they say Christians as anti-homosexual, would an example of that be, you must clean that up before you come to the church?
Might be.
Versus come to the church and let that be part of the conviction that happens.
Yeah, I think what's interesting, and you touched on this, is you try to oftentimes try to flip the equation. Okay, if we asked millennials who are going to church, what do they think of the millennials who aren't going to church? Or rather, what do you think of the culture who aren't going to church? I think a lot of them would say, well, they're judgmental. They don't know us. If they knew us, we could be authentic and we could say, man, we're messy too. And I would say they think that we are one way, anti-homosexual, but really, man, we love them. We want them to come and process and grow and be, in process alongside of us. Bring their messiness in. Would the numbers, percentages be the same? I don't know. But sometimes what's really helpful is to look in the mirror when you see something like this. It's a bit of a gut check. Say, why is it such a gut check?
I was just going to say, as a public school teacher for 20 years, I definitely see a huge change, in the students your kid to school to learn how to read and write and do arithmetic. And now we have asked the school to do a ginormous amount of the parenting because we have kids coming from broken homes. And we're actually getting kids who are the grandkids of broken homes. And I think that's the difference there, is that you have parents now who didn't get to see a model of parenting and are working hard. And so, I mean, I was really challenged on Tuesday night to, maybe the question is not how do we bring them to the church, but how do we go out and love? Like, how do we go where they are and where they're hurting and love them where they are? And if they never come to our church building, that's okay if they know Christ and we have them loved to where they are.
Thank you.
I think we fail as a church to be disciple makers. And that takes friendship, that takes time, that takes investing one-on-one with somebody. If you've ever gone anywhere and seen what would happen if we just find one more and disciple them, and a little bit later they can go out and reach somebody new to disciple. I'm free from this person because I taught them and trained them, and I can go out and find the other. If you just do that, it isn't very many years down the line, we have successfully conquered the entire world. And so it's loving, it's all the, everything you have up there, the skepticism, that's all, it's because we're not connecting one-on-one, we're not showing the love of Christ. And I think we got to get back to just to the basics. Not worry about numbers, not worry about programs. Worry about coming alongside somebody that needs you. I lost my wife about 4 years ago to cancer. I just needed the church, and they did a great job. The church I was going to came alongside of me. Mark, I know in your life you've had really tough times. I know your story. And his son-in-law passing away of cancer was the best friend of my oldest son. And walking through this, you just need the church to come alongside you. And if we do that really good, this stuff will go away.
We talked about bridging the, thank you. Yeah, we talked about bridging the generational gap. And I mentioned a book, Hero Maker, and it talks about that multiplication effect that happens when we invest in someone. When he uses a term, an I see in you conversation, I see in you. And you just simply say, hey, this is someone who I've got a little bit of relationship with, and I see in you that you're a leader. Part of what I wanted to come in here and tell you guys is I see you as leaders. Done this with our staff. I see in you empathy that I wish I had the depth. I see in you discernment that is so valuable for us as a church, right? And you start having these I see in you conversations in a one-to-one or in a small group type of environment, and discipleship can change. So if you haven't read Hero Maker, it's worth a read, and it's short. I think I read the first time through it in 2 sessions, two reading. I'm sitting down reading it 2 times, or 2 different sessions. So it definitely won't take you a year to get through, by any means, unless you're really not a reader. And then maybe I guess I shouldn't make that statement. So yeah.
One thing I've experienced a lot in the last 10 years is how many people have left the church once their kids are grown. They don't feel like they know where they fit, or they feel like they were very involved in church, like in Awana programs and stuff, and their kids were also involved. And then the kids went off to college, got married, and maybe don't even live in the area anymore, and now they just think they don't have to go to church anymore, or they've said, oh, we did that stuff when our kids were young. So now they just stay at home and watch something on TV, and it's disturbing to me because they have all this knowledge now, and I feel like we need to be there for that younger generation. We need to encourage them while they're raising their children and going through difficulties and stuff, but I've seen so much of it in recent years.
I've heard that an empty nest can be a lonely nest, and when loneliness creeps in, life changes, and it can be hard to break out of that mold. I'm not there, I've never been there, but I've heard that. One more, and then we're going to wrap up for the day.
So just looking at the wording above the stats there, a third of those surveyed, which would be about 278 out of 834. So that's the response of those 278 that do not attend church. Okay? So do you think that if we went to a different generation and we looked at people
that did not attend church, we probably get about the same results.
You know, I don't know necessarily. This one stood out to me because I was trying to really unpack the millennial generation, thinking that may be a key for us because it sits right in this, this gap that we have right now. And so that was really the focus of, where I was trying to go, gathering as much information as I could. But I don't think it would be all that skewed until you get to the extremes of these generations. I think the extremes of the Z's, well, they haven't processed it enough. They don't know. They're still learning how to tie their shoes, They're trying to figure out what they even like for their food. Their palate is still developing, if you will, right? And same with the other end is, I think that you probably see a little bit less of the percentages there, probably in the middle, if you will, but I'm not sure that it would drastically change.
I'm thinking like X's and boomers, right? I'm thinking about people that leave our church.
Yeah.
And I never see them again. I find out that they're not going.
Yeah.
And it seems to be one of those three things might pop up.
I
The
think
good
that's
news
accurate.
is that 2/3 don't see it that way.
Right.
Right?
There is positive here. We have focused a lot on the negative today, right? Yeah, the positive. We got two more. Wow. Okay, we got time. Go ahead.
What we've seen quite a bit is in older generations, like what you're talking about, something happened to them. Either something happened with the pastor in their church or something specific happened to them in their church. They had a bad experience, put a bad taste in their mouth, turned them away from the church as opposed to a general feeling of those things.
Hey, listen, if I'm in leadership and I am a part of a problem that is causing people now to be skeptical of that church, I'm going to withdraw. I am. That's my personality too. I get that. That happens for sure. If I was giving to a church and now there's a moral failure or a big change in the organization that is not my heart, well, I'm probably going to change what I'm doing. Change is a big part of tomorrow's talk, by the way. Last one, really the last one.
Excuses that these people say, they're judgmental, they're anti-homosexual, or is this their excuses, or is this, are these choices that they're given to them?
Are you asking if in this survey they said, do you feel this way? Or if they're just asking a question that's a blanket question? That I don't know.
Right out of the blue, why aren't you going to church?
That I don't know, but I do know that as I've asked people, that these, and not asked, do you feel like the church is, this or that hypocritical or what? These are things that I get back to me. Well, I don't go to church because I think the church is, full of hypocritical people. I'm going, you're right. Come join us. Like that's, for sure. But I don't think that this was necessarily a choose A, B, C or a lead question, a leading question that way. But I don't know. I didn't write the research. So we're out of time. Let's wrap this up. Tomorrow we are going to attempt to give a bit of some strategies and some thoughts, some ideas, and I want to hear yours, probably most important tomorrow, as the so what. The so what. We have enough framework now to develop some really, really effective so what. And so I've got 3 slides with just a few points on each of them of here's some things that I've done with churches in the past, whether they're churches I've been on staff with or that I've consulted with, that I've done some research with and seen that have been effective. And again, not all these are going to apply to all of the churches, and even if they apply to you, it doesn't mean it's something that you should do, but here are some ideas. That's going to be tomorrow, and I've got the slide Growing Young, up there. So I love that. So that's our discussion tomorrow, and I'd say let's spend the most of the time tomorrow hearing together from this. I love your discussion. I love your engagement. I really do. This is so valuable to get your perspective together as a community on this. It's not easy. It's not easy because we all messy. And we're trying to reach messy people. That's the scene. Thanks. Way to go, guys.